Warning. The topics discussed on this podcast are subject to adult themes and languages. We seek to unravel the unexplained and unknown. This is Encounters.
Hi everyone and welcome to Encounters. My name's Dakota.
And I'm Amanda.
And today we are giving you a time travel through UFOlogy starting in the early 1980s and traveling as far back as 1960... What is it, Amanda? 1964?
Yes, 1964.
So we didn't give you all the decades, but we definitely gave you some 80s, 70s, and 60s. So
yes.
Little time capsule of UFO stories from yesteryear.
Yeah, because one thing me and Dakota were definitely noticing is there is a lot of stories that happen in the 80s, the 70s, 60s, 50s, 40s, especially some of the most famous stories like Roswell and Betty and Barney Hill were from this kind of era.
So we wanted to jump in and see if we could find anything else that may tickle our fancies or may spark interest for future episodes. So if there's anything that's not mentioned today that you think might be interesting for us to talk about, go ahead and send us an email at encountersthepodcast@gmail.com. Make sure you like and subscribe to our YouTube channel, which you can find at Encounters the Podcast or Encounters a Paranormal Experience. And find us on any of our social media, like, follow, subscribe, do the fun thing, and let us know what you think.
Yes, I know. I'm really excited. I think we found a couple of good ones in this little time jump that we're doing. I was actually pretty impressed, I won't lie.
Pretty impressed with what?
The stories?
Oh, okay. Well, good.
What do you
I'm
mean?
not impressed with my stories. I'm going to be just flat out honest with you. I was really impressed, and then, some of the ways that the skeptics talk about the UFOs in my stories, I'm kind of like, interesting. So dismissive, but
Yeah.
I don't know. It's always interesting to me, especially the further away from the 50s, 60s, 70s we get. The 80s and early 90s UFO stories I find fascinating because we always talk about how we don't see things nowadays, we don't hear things nowadays, and I don't believe that's true. I just think we think people that say things nowadays are crazy.
Right. And also the invention of cell phone cameras. Dakota mentioned it just a second ago, but we've been doing reactions over on YouTube, and we've seen quite a bit of cell phone footage of what people lights in the sky.
Yeah, I believe we have an episode dropping on Friday of the leap year, or has dropped Friday of the leap year, that specifically deals with UFOs in the sky. So check out our YouTube channel and see some of these spooky YouTube viewings of things in the sky yourself.
Yeah.
But without further ado, here is Amanda and I's review or a time capsule of UFO history.
Yay!
Starting with the 1984 Hudson Valley UFO sightings. Now, this is also known as the Westchester Boomerang. It was kind of a series of sightings that stretched from 1983 to 1984 in a wide area of the New England portion of the map from New York to western Connecticut. Now, there were various sightings in Westchester County, Dutchess County, and Putnam County. Reports were commonly lumped into this massive wave in March of 1983 and through the summer of 1984, where the large variety reported, quote, usually a V-shape or circle and absolute noiseless, outlined with brilliant lights of white, red, and green. The objects were described as being able to shoot straight across the sky and hover for extended periods of time while making absolutely no noise, and that they always traveled in this V formation. The New York Times ran an article where they interviewed various people that experienced the Westchester Boomerang. And I've got a few interviews here I want to read for you. So, William A. Pollard was driving along Interstate 84 near Brewster when he said, He was 29 and a manager of an automobile service. He said,
I said, yeah, I never believed in that stuff, but off in the field, I saw this gigantic triangle with lights about 30 feet off the ground, hovering. Then it turned off its lights and shot straight up. Straight up. Then I said, whoa, wait a minute here.
That's the end of his testimony.
Nice.
Throughout Westchester County, Dutchess, and Putnam counties, and western Connecticut, thousands of residents reported strange objects in the sky, each usually in a V-shape or circle formation about the size of a football field. They were absolutely noiseless and outlined in brilliant lights of white, red, and green. Irene Lunn said,
If it's not a UFO, I want to know exactly what it is and what it's doing around here, and I want it stopped.
Mrs. Lunn was among one of those reported who most recently saw the sighting. This past Monday night, she was coming home from the supermarket at 9 p.m. with her 5-year-old daughter Erica when she said, quote,
I saw it over a pond of a nearby farm. It was high enough just to clear the trees and travel south. It wasn't an airplane, it wasn't a helicopter, it wasn't a hang glider. There was no sound at all. You could hear the crickets. She described an object, quote, about 3/4 the size of my house with an L-shaped structure suspended underneath it. It actually stopped over the house, Miss Lunn said. At one point, and all the lights went green, then red, and then they went back to a pattern of green and red and white. I felt like it was letting us know it knew we were watching it. That was scary. This went on for about 10 minutes.
So these kinds of sightings were rare, where you had interactions where people were actually attacked. The majority of the sightings just reported seeing noiseless lights in the sky in a V-shaped formation. There was a interaction at the Indian Point nuclear power plant on June 14th and July 24th, 1984, where guards saw a 900-foot UFO hovering over the plant for about 15 minutes. One of the security guards said it was 100 feet long and over 300 yards above the plant and looked to be like helicopters in a V formation. The security guard said, quote, that's what the guards broke out the shotguns. So, yeah.
What happened next when they brought out the shotgun?
Caused mass hysteria. I want to see if there's any other example reports I can pull up for you guys really quick. The state police got involved, and Sergeant Kenneth Spiro was able to track the lights down to Stormville Airport in Dutchess County. He said, quote, it was a group of light planes. They fly in formation. The undersides and under the wings are painted black so they can't be seen from the ground. The planes are rigged with bright lights so they can turn from one color to another. It's the lights that have given the shape of the UFO, end quote. According to the police officer, he spoke with a couple of the pilots and they were just getting a big kick out of it, but there were no violations of the law. According to the New York Times, the people, specifically Mr. Pollard is quoted again, they went back and told people what the sergeant had found about the so-called lights in the sky. And Mr. Pollard, who was one of the ones who had seen the lights originally, said,
I've seen those jerks 5 or 6 times, Mr. Pollard said about the pilots flying in formation. They're nothing like what I saw the first time. Nothing at all.
There were a couple of investigations done. Specifically, skeptical writer Brian Dunning speculated that the Hudson Valley UFO phenomenon was popularized by books like Night Siege. According to Dunning, quote, these were not journalists or objective reporters. They were all UFO authors who made their career out of sensationalizing these little stories that they found by keeping an eye on the newspapers. None have any serious academic credibility. Ooh, damn.
That's rude.
According to Discover magazine in 1984, the supposed group of pilots had been practicing their formation skills first in the daytime, and then when they got more confident at night. They became a tight formation aircraft with about 6 inches between their wings tips. The pilots, amused, began calling themselves the, quote, Martians. They would turn off their exterior lights at the same time, and they would make the aircraft appear to disappear from the sky, then vary their formation from crescents and circles to cross and be looked at from the ground like diamonds or V's, giving rise to reports about different and sometimes startling UFO shapes. Going back to Brian Dunning, when asked about the phenomenon, he said, the UFO looked the same, behaved the same, and flew in the same way in the same place. Would that not be a staggering coincidence? Isn't it more likely that our human perceptual errors and confirmation bias and selective memory and all that other cognitive phenomena that shape our perceptions played some role here? Personally, I think it has. I guess even Dr. Hynek from Project Blue Book got involved in 1984. They said that there was a reward offered for $1,000 for any information if anyone could find these pilots, but it's really weird that we have conflicting information that says that they were proudly calling themselves the Martians, but then suddenly people are offering for money to find these people and you can't find them. But Hynek, former scientist and advisor to Project Blue Book later in life, converted to the belief in the mystery of UFOs, described the incident as absolutely weird. And said that there's no logical explanation for it. UFOologists convened on Brewster, New York to discuss the recent sightings, and I mean, it's talked about as a very important sighting because hundreds of thousands of people reported seeing lights in the sky. So, was it people flying airplanes that had been painted black in 1984 and people were like, oh no, what's a plane? Or were people seeing unidentified flying objects? You tell me.
Right. Damn.
That's all I got for that one.
Alrighty. Thank you for that. Okay. So now we are going to travel over to the Welsh Roswell, or it's also known as Roswelsh. Okay. This is the Berwyn UFO incident. And I just want to say this from the top because this is where I'm going to get most of my information and what I'm reading from. This comes from Myths and Legends and Oddities, Northeast Wales. Okay? So, and this is from the Beauty, History, and Folklore. I can't say this word, Dakota. Folklore. Yes. Folklore of Northeast Wales. So this incident takes place on January 23rd, 1974. And this is happening around the evening time. And this is happening in a little village. Well, I shouldn't say a little. It's a village around the Berwyn Mountains. And so they say, witnesses say, around almost 9 o'clock-ish, a lot of them were awakened by what they thought was an explosion. A lot of people said they saw a bright light kind of explode, and an explosion, this bright light, and then they felt like the earth shaking, right? So they feel the earth shaking, and a lot of the locals were worried that something had happened. They weren't sure. A lot of them thought that maybe a plane crash had happened, or something crashed into something, or something crashed into the mountains. So, of course, a lot of people started going outside, were trying to see what was happening. Other people were calling around to their neighbors, trying to make sure everybody was safe. And many of them reported seeing lights falling from the sky. And they also talked about seeing trails of green flames and other flames in the sky. Of course, that means many started calling the police. The police did come out, and within the first hour, there were about 10 police officers. And they went out and started searching the area. They ended up calling Mountain Rescue to also search the area and to fly over the area and see what was happening and see what was going on, what everybody was reporting. Eventually, a bunch of these witnesses claimed that men in black showed up. So these well-to-do men showed up in these black suits and started asking questions or whatnot. But quickly, this became what a lot of people consider a cover-up, okay? So a lot of people, what the government ends up saying happens, a lot of people don't believe. But before I tell you what the government said happened that night, I want to give you some like witness accounts of what they saw. And they say from this website I just talked about, they say one of the most interesting witnesses is probably a district nurse named Pam Evans. She said she heard the explosion and believed, like many, that a plane had crashed into the mountain. So she decided to drive up as close as possible to the site to see if she could help because she was a nurse. And that's when she saw what she claimed to say was a huge ball of glowing lights on the side of the mountain. She said she was startled and she saw that the light, they were scattered all around, which she believed at the time were actually rescue workers approaching the site. Though she later was kind of thinking to herself, like, how would they have arrived so soon after this explosion? Because I guess she was really close to these mountains and got there really quickly. But she sees all these lights just kind of scattered all around these mountains. She doesn't believe what everybody is saying about what actually happened. She believes that the military and police came and to the site and kind of picked up whatever it was there and took it to a different place, a lot like Roswell. And she also believes that there's a big cover-up because she said whatever she saw, it had to be some kind of UFO. She's quoted saying,
"It had to be a UFO of some sort. I'm talking about something that could only have gotten there by flying and landing."
There was another witness whose last name is Edwards, and he claimed he also saw a UFO. But he said he actually saw the UFO in the area around February 15th, 1974. So this was about 3 weeks after the incident. And he said it looked like a...
Landrello.
It's not Landrello. I don't think I ever said it, actually. Okay. So he said it looked like a ragged ball, but the end of it was pointy. When it took off, it just went like lightning in the same line it hovered. He claimed it was definitely a flying saucer and goes to some effort to explain that he was on the way to the pub at the time rather than returning home. So he wanted to make sure people knew that. But a lot of people feel like it's a cover-up because what the government claims happened that night is that, and this article goes, and a lot of articles I've seen or like people talking about it love to kind of use this line. There is a wealth of scientific evidence that what happened that night was not a UFO at all, but very much something of natural causes. So the Institute of Geological Science, now known as the British Geological Survey, reports that a 3.5 earthquake occurred at 8:38 p.m. in the area, right? Which would have been felt for about 50 miles. And what they report happened at the exact same time as this earthquake was a meteor shower. So that's why people were seeing fireballs falling from the sky. And so this meteor shower happened at the same time as people heard this explosion and felt this earthquake. But the thing about it is a lot of people talked about feeling like seeing this big old bright light and feeling this explosion. And a lot of people do not believe that it was any kind of earthquake, meteor shower. One, they never found this meteor. They say that it probably would have kind of like shrank and disintegrated, kind of falling into the Earth's atmosphere. But that's why people saw this green flare or this kind of fiery thing was from this meteorite. And I did watch this video, and they had interviewed a man who was 14 at the time of this happening, and he said that he had never felt an earthquake like that ever, and he still lives in this town to this very day. So a lot of people think it was a cover-up, and that's why a lot of people consider it the Welsh Roswell. They also say that the men in black people supposedly saw that day were actually most likely folks from Key University coming out to kind of see what was going on and explore. I will say, if you want to learn more about this particular UFO phenomenon, there are many documentaries, there are many books. There's one book completely just, it's called the Berwyn UFO incident, that actually talks about this. And so a lot of people, UFOologists, really still consider it a pretty credible, once again, like Dakota talked about with his, a credible UFO event. A lot of people all around these Berwyn Mountains felt and saw lights in the sky. A lot of them believe that the military came in with flatbeds and took them away and took them to a town not too far away from where they were. But I don't know. I'll leave that one up to you. But that is kind of a overview of the Berwyn UFO incident.
Ooh, thank you for that, Amanda.
Thank you.
All right, so the next incident is going to be staying in 1970s, but jumping forward to 1976 and then moving across the globe a little bit further Middle East. We're going to Tehran for the Tehran UFO incident. This one was a unique incident for me to learn about. I didn't really know much about lights in the sky, but when you specifically talked about an earthquake and meteor shower, that's really interesting because the meteor shower is also mentioned here in my story as well.
Ooh.
So, in 1976, there was 4 calls placed to the Iranian Air Force, the Imperial Iranian Air Force, that there were strange lights in the sky and an object that was floating around. They sent 2 F-4 Phantom jet interceptors to go and take care of it. And we're talking, this is like just past midnight, early hours of September 19th, 1976. And the little bit of reporting that we get at the time says that the first airman, what was his name? My apologies on how this is pronounced. Lieutenant Naziri of the Imperial Iranian Air Force flew his F-4 Phantom jet interceptor into the area and said that it suffered mechanical failure and engine failure, and he was forced to return to make landing, whereas the other fighter jet, the other interceptor, which had Major Perivz Jafari and First Lieutenant Jalal Damarian, said that they were intending to pull arms and weapons at this thing and also suffered mechanical failure, but intentionally and specifically were not able to pull or utilize their weapons, and then something blasted at them, causing mechanical failure, and they were forced to return and make a landing as well. This was kind of swept under the rug. No one really talked about it. Major Jafari described the incident with, quote, the object as flashing with intense red, green, orange, and blue lights, so bright that I was not able to see its body. His plane suffered communication shut off. Jafari later said that he was, quote, startled by the round object which came out of the primary object and shot straight towards me at a high rate of speed, almost as if it were a missile, end quote. He attempted to fire back, but nothing was working. He could only report to air traffic control, which told him to return. Jafari looked to his left and saw, quote, the primary diamond-shaped thing up there, and another bright object came out and it headed directly towards the ground. It seemed to slow and land gently to the ground, radiating a high, bright light. The next day, Jafari and Damarian flew by helicopter to the area where they thought the light hit the ground, finding nothing. Occupants of nearby houses reported hearing only a loud noise and a bright flash of light during the night. So, they've declassified a bunch of military documents, but while nobody thought this was important at the time to talk about, it was definitely being transmuted around to the Joint Chiefs of Staff. And I have the wire message verbatim here that I'm going to read for you guys. So bear with me. I might skip over some of it, but it kind of tells this story in a little bit more of an intense way. At or about 12:30 a.m. on September 1976, Blank received 4 telephone calls from the citizens living in the Sumerian area of Tehran saying that they had seen some strange lights in the sky. Some reported a kind of bird-like object, while others reported a helicopter with a light on. There were no helicopters airborne at this time. After he told the citizen it was only a stars and had talked to Melbrad Tower, he decided to look for himself. He noticed an object in the sky similar to a star, bigger and brighter. He decided to scramble an F-4 from Cherokee Air Force Base to investigate. He broke off to intercept and headed back to Cherokee after he lost all communications with the intercom. He regained communications once he remained and returned to the ground. The size of the radar return was comparable to that of a 707 tanker. A visual size of the object was difficult to discern because of its intense brilliance. The light that it gave off was from that of a flashing strobe light arranged in a rectangular pattern and alternating blue, green, red, and orange in color. The sequence of lights was so fast that all the colors could be seen at once. The object and the pursuing F-4 continued on a course to the south of Tehran when another brilliantly lighted object, estimated to be 1/2 of 1/3 of the apparent size of the moon, came out of the original object. The second object headed straight towards the F-4 at a very fast rate of speed. This is currently talking about the second F-4 that was in pursuit after the first F-4 pulled off for communication error. The pilot attempted to fire an AIM-9 missile at the object, but the instant his weapon control panel went off and he lost all communications, UHF, and interphone. At this point, the pilot initiated a turn to negative G dive to get away. As he turned, the object fell in trail at what appeared to be a 3 to 4 nm as he continued in his turn away from the primary object. The second object went to the inside of his turn, then returned to the primary object in perfect rejoin. Shortly after the second object joined with the primary object, another object appeared to come out of the other side of the primary object and go straight down to a great rate of speed. The F-4 crew had regained communications in the weapons control panel and watched the object approach the ground, anticipating a large explosion. This object appeared to come to a rest gently on the earth and cast a very bright light over the area about 2 to 3 kilometers. The crew descended from their altitude from 25 meters to 15 meters and continued to observe and mark the object's position. They had some difficulty in adjusting their night visibility for landing, so after orbiting Merbad a few times, they went out on a straight-in landing. It then documents that they went out during the daylight. The F-4 crew was taken out to the area in a helicopter where the object apparently had landed. Nothing was noticed at the time at the spot that they thought the object landing, a dry lake bed, but they circled off to the west in the area and they picked up a very noticeable beeper signal. At the point where they returned, there was the small house with a garden. They landed and asked the people within if they had noticed anything strange that night. The people talked of a loud noise and a very bright light like lightning. The aircraft and area where the object is believed to have landed are being checked for possible radiation. More information will be forwarded when it becomes available. So, that is what was circulating at the time to the Joint Chiefs of Staff about the Tehran incident. But many people had a whole lot of different discussions as to what they thought this might have been. According to U.S. journalist Philip Glass, he thought that the pilots likely saw an astronomical body, probably Jupiter, and that it was the pilot's incompetence and equipment malfunction that actually resulted in this encounter or sighting of a UFO. According to Glass, the technicians at the airbase stated that the F-4s reported to have failing equipment various times and have a long history of electrical outages, having been repaired only a month before the incident. Class also cites a McDonnell Douglas repair supervisor's opinion that the F-4's radar could have been in manual track mode, causing the wrong interpretation on the radar. Another skeptic author, Brian Dunning, here we go again, observes that the 19th of September, the day of the incident, was the height of 2 annual meteor showers, the Gamma Pisides and the Southern Pisides, the tail of Eta Draconoids. I'm so sorry, star people. This is not my gig. So, observation of falling objects or odd light would not have been unusual. At the site where the falling light supposedly crashed, a beeping transponder from a C-141 aircraft was found, according to the investigating Colonel Moy. According to Dunning, quote, "Once we look at the story's elements without the presumptions of an alien spaceship, the only thing unusual about the Tehran 1976 UFO case is that planes were chasing celestial objects and had equipment failures. There have been many cases where planes had equipment failures, and there have been many cases where planes misidentified celestial objects. Once in a while, both will happen on the same flight." So, again, Dunning is just saying this is an overly hyped situation wherein people saw what they wanted to see. According to the investigation, the people around just heard loud noises and saw bright lights. And it was described that the thing the size of a football field that came out and was half the size of a football field was actually just, meteor shower. And that these airmen didn't know what they were talking about and just really had some rocks from space scare them. Other references, though, you can find this. This was covered in 1994 by the TV program The Sightings. And then it stands out as number 7 on the Daily Telegraph's top 10 UFO sightings and is number 10 on the Guardian's top 10 UFO sightings.
Dope.
You can read the whole editorial. You can jump on it in the Declassified Freedom of Information Act. You can see the United States Air Force Security Services Quarterly, which has a dramatized version of this story. I thought it was more important to give the Joint Chiefs of Staff version of it because something about having cut and dry metered data seems more interesting to me than a newsletter that was circulating around 4 or 5 years later. But it's still wild to think about people dismissing this or acting like this wasn't happening on the outside, while on the inside they were like, "Yo, did you guys see what happened to Tehran the other day?" No, don't tell the public. But
right,
that was the Tehran incident. I think it's very interesting. Lights flashing in the sky, but simple and basic.
Right. Can we take a quick pause? I know we have one more story after this, but I just want to take a quick pause because those last 2 stories were so similar.
Yeah.
And it's the fact that they just kind of dismiss all of this stuff as like meteor showers, earthquakes. It's like, like, I get it, especially if you're skeptical. Like, of course, a meteor shower and an earthquake, like lights falling from the sky, meteor shower. But it's just kind of weird. Like, the people who actually experience it always are like, it's not a meteor shower.
It's not a meteor shower. It's not Jupiter. I'm not fighting Jupiter in the sky.
Right. But maybe it's me. Maybe I'm the problem because he could be right. Maybe it was just like equipment malfunctioning plus meteor shower, or earthquake plus meteor shower equals a whole fucking town thinking there's an explosion. But what do I know? I'm just a girl on the internet talking about aliens with my best friend.
No, that's it for me on Tehran.
All right. So here is our last incident. It's called the let me put some respect on his name. Officer Lonnie Zamora's UFO incident. So this has been hailed as one of the best documented UFO sightings in U.S. history. There's a lot going on and also not a lot going on. So this actually takes place in Socorro, New Mexico, and this takes place back in April 24th, 1964. So what was happening is in the late afternoon, Officer Zamora was on duty, and he was actually in pursuit of a speeding car. And this speeding car was heading towards the south side of Sakuro. Around 5:54, he ends up hearing a loud roar and witnesses a flame in the sky. And he says this was about a half a mile away to a mile away, or for people who use kilometers, it's 1.6 kilometers away. So he decides to stop pursuing this speeding car because he actually thinks that there is an explosion over at a dynamite shack. He's a police officer, so he decides that he needs to go investigate this and ends up radioing his dispatcher named Lopez and letting him know what he had seen, what he had heard, and that he was actually heading towards the direction of the blast. As he ends up getting closer, he's about 50 yards away. He thinks he sees a vehicle that needs help. He thinks that there is a vehicle that is turned over because all he sees is this kind of like shiny thing in this distance. So again, he ends up contacting the sheriff's office saying that he is investigating a potential accident. At this point, he reaches out to a police sergeant named Chavez, and he's a police sergeant of the New Mexico Police Department. So he's letting them know, hey, I think there's an accident. He also sees smoke coming from this area. So he decides to get out of his police cruiser and to walk towards this area. And as he gets closer and closer, he realizes that this is not a car. He says he spots a huge white craft. He says it's about the size of a propane storage tanks. You know, those huge propane storage tanks?
Yeah.
Yeah, that's the size of this thing. As he gets closer, he notices, one, that it's not, like I said, it's not a car, that it's sitting on three kind of legs that are kind of holding up this big egg-shaped craft. And he also notices that there is a red insignia on it, and he describes it as kind of the shape of a umbrella with a downward facing arrow in it under this arch.
Weird.
The other really creepy thing that he sees are these two figures. He says they looked like similar to the size of small adults. And he said these figures wore white suits. He said they almost looked like lab suits or like coveralls. And as he approached, the two little human-sized things ends up rushing towards the craft, getting inside. And that's when he starts to expect these things are going to attack him. So he ends up kind of taking cover, and that's when he hears something that is similar to a door slamming. And this is when the craft takes off, just takes off into the air. And when he says when it lifts off, he can hear that loud roaring sound again. And he also sees bright blue lights coming from the craft. And he says it kind of goes up into the air, but it doesn't go up very high, but it goes up pretty quickly. And he says it kind of like drifts across the sky before taking off behind I think a mountain or something. And the way he describes this craft, just to give a little more detail on the way he describes it. He says it's an egg-shaped craft sitting on kind of three legs that are sitting on the ground, and it's made of a shiny aluminum like metal that was really like standing out behind this like kind of beautiful mesa background. The other thing that makes this story so significant and well documented is that Zamora was not the only person to see this. There were several other witnesses that reported seeing the same craft, that egg-shaped craft with that red insignia on it with the same kind of flames. Though some report seeing like blue flames that kind of then become like reddish, orangish flames as it starts to fly away. Among these witnesses that reported seeing the same craft were 2 men who were traveling from Iowa, and they said they were driving near Socorro when they saw the same shiny thing in a cloud of smoke, as well as 5 tourists that came from Colorado that also reported seeing the craft flying in the air. Another interesting thing is, of course, since Officer Zamora called in the accident, and he also called in for the Sergeant Chavez to come. Once they got there, they investigated the area, and they did see these 3 indentions from where these legs are supposedly were, and they also did see charred sand at the same spot. So that would also explain that fire that they also saw. And this got really big. Not only were the police investigating this, but also the Air Force kind of came in and took over. And the Air Force ended up collecting and impounding most of the evidence that the New Mexico police did uncover. The reason people felt like the military got involved is because Socorro is not too far from White Sands missile range, which had a lot of stuff going on over there. They were doing a lot of bomb testing. Remember, this is 1974. My dad was actually stationed in White Sands for a little while, and he even talked about some interesting things that were happening there. But things that made this story so believable was not only the eyewitness accounts, but also the evidence that was left behind. They did say that they did see unexplained footprints around the area, as well as the burnt sand, as well as also burnt vegetation in the area that the government and the military came and took over. And just like in Dakota's story, Project Blue Book does make an appearance. They still consider this sighting to be unknown, which makes it quite credible in a lot of people's eyes. Though some skeptics do have their theories on what it is. In the Project Blue Book, it is seen as one of the more compelling stories. Mr. Dr.
Hynek.
Yes, Dr. Hynek is also mentioned. He did come and investigate and do some research on this, and he really felt like this was a very, very credible story. But like I said, the skeptics do also have their theories. What they and the military did kind of chop this up to once again being some kind of natural phenomenon or something that in nature that was actually happening. Nobody believes that. A lot of people also believe that, hey, it's not too far from White Sands. It's about 100 miles away from White Sands, so it's not close. But maybe it was something kind of like another weather balloon kind of something, or testing happening in the area. They also believe that it was actually just a prank, a prank from a nearby university. But like I said, that thing floated up in the air. I don't know what college students are doing that. Like, I don't care what school it is. I don't know what college students could be capable of tricking a police officer like that. To mention this, Zamora is what gives a lot of credibility to the story. Officer Zamora, he did end up getting a lot of backlash professionally after this story came out. He had worked very hard to earn the respect of his colleagues in community, but after this, a lot of people did make fun of him and teased him, especially on the police force. And within, I think, after a year after the incident, he ends up retiring from the police force. 2 years after the incident, he ends up retiring from the police force. And he, at first, was being very open with not only UFOologists, but also the military. But after his retirement, he did not want anything to do with any of this. He did not talk to anybody about his experience. He ended up becoming a manager at a gas station and lived out the rest of his years in Socorro. But unfortunately, in November of 2009, he did pass away at the age of 76. So, again, kind of like I said with the last story, a lot of people do cover this. A lot of people talk about it. It has been in a lot of documentaries and specials on UFOs, as well as there is a book all about it. And the city of Socorro does honor their history in this way. They do have a mural of Officer Zamora and his encounter at the place of the encounter that people can go to as like a memorial and a historic spot. So that's pretty much what I have about that incident. But it is very, very... It's just, I find that one, I know we use this word a lot, interesting. It's just so interesting.
I knew you were going to say that. I knew you were going to say it was interesting. Fascinating.
Yes.
Vulgar.
I know.
Riveting.
Riveting, that is a great word.
Introspective.
I think riveting is a great word for this. Though the story is pretty cut and dry, there was a lot of witnesses. Zamora saw something that day, and especially when people kind of turn away from UFOs and don't want to necessarily like be in the community as much sometimes. I shouldn't say people who are in the community aren't credible, but I feel like there's just a lot of credibility to what he said and what he saw. And it just sucks that when people do come forward, especially in our armed forces or police departments, that they get made fun of or dismissed or looked down on, without getting into preachy mode. But a very, very riveting story, if I do say so myself. That's all I have.
Well, those were 4 wonderful alien stories from the 1970s, 60s, and the 80s. Wow, I did that in the weirdest order. But we hope you enjoyed them. If you have any other favorite stories that you want to learn about, or you want us to learn about and read to you guys about, hit us up at encountersthepodcast@gmail.com. I did recently find about some encounters from the 1800s with aliens, so be on the lookout for that as Amanda and I go even further back in history to give you Victorian alien stories later sometime this season.
Yay.
Join us next week when we do another Encounters Revisit with Annabelle and Robert the Doll. That's right. Encounters is going haunted dolls next time on Encounters.
No, I'm excited. I love haunted dolls. This is going to be fun.
There's the big question. Last time we asked, was Annabelle spookier or was Robert spookier? This time it's, why is Megan the spooky doll?
Annabelle's spooky in the movie. Annabelle's not spooky in real life.
No, disagreed, but I'm saving that for the next episode. If you like what you hear, find us on any of our social media and tell us how much you love us. You can send us an email at encountersthepodcast@gmail.com. You can leave a review anywhere you get your podcasts. You can like and subscribe to us on YouTube, or you can just send us buckets full of money. We love anything that you want to do for us, and we look forward to it. But seriously, if you're going to send buckets, make sure it's cash. We can't be tracked. Thank you. And until next time, I'm Dakota.
I'm Amanda.
Stay spooky.